Government budgets are about priorities. Where our government spends money depends on what interest groups hold sway over what members of Congress. If they have a lot of sway over those members of Congress, they get the votes and the money starts to flow to this or that project or this or that district. Now, money for the Keystone Pipeline is one of the examples that is about money and priorities in politics. Now, this pipeline is supposed to transport oil from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico, and it's an example, as I said, about government priorities. Who benefits from this project if approved? With me to talk about the Keystone Pipeline and where the government should be spending money is teacher and writer Eleanor Bader. Eleanor has written a piece in Truthout called Our Misplaced Undemocratic Budget Priorities, the Case of the Keystone XL. Hello, Eleanor. Welcome to Truthout Interviews.
Hello.
So my first question is about the Keystone Pipeline. It already exists in some form. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about some of the key players involved in this conflict. Who is it going to affect? What communities? I mean, this pipeline is going to be running through a number of counties, a number of states, and certainly there's a lot of concern from the citizens in those and residents in those areas about the expansion of this pipeline for a number of reasons.
Sure. There are a lot of people who are really opposed to this pipeline because they're very fearful of the ecological damage that it's going to cause. They also believe that some of the tax subsidies that the oil companies are going to get are really a bad use of government resources, and that instead of building and continuing to build this pipeline and promoting it, that we should instead be thinking about better ways of creating alternatives, such as mass rail systems, such as better public transportation systems, and ways for people to be able to get from point A to point B without necessarily having to rely on oil at the rate that we are. But a lot of people, there's one group in particular that I wrote about called Bold, Nebraska, and they are really freaked out about what might happen should the pipeline continue southward, because under the current Nebraska law, the petroleum industry, all the folks in Canada and in the US who are really psyched to build this thing, can take private land through eminent domain. And people there are really people who've had farms in their families for generations, people who have inherited their farm from their great-grandparents and been working the land for centuries almost, are completely at risk now of losing it should TransCanada walk in and say, that land, that's what we want. So they are people very specifically who are affected, and they're people who aren't necessarily progressive. They're people who are ranchers who simply think that it's wrong for someone from another country to walk in and say, give me your land, we want it. And for you as a public citizen who's lived on that land for generations to have no recourse.
You mentioned something about eminent domain. When the interstate highway system was being built, the government did use eminent domain to essentially take over land so they could build a highway or a freeway. My wife's family had some land, and the government bought them out to put in a freeway. And in California, this was done. At least the interstate highway system was done under the notion that it would not only benefit citizens and residents in towns and so forth, but it was a military necessity as well. Now, this is different in that a private company is coming in and saying, we want you, the U.S. government, to use your power of eminent domain to buy up this land for us, for our benefit. So that's totally different. There's no national security threat there, is there?
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, it's putting people at risk because the ecological damage that a pipeline can cause is really terrifying. Not only would it exacerbate climate change by elevating temperatures and elevating sea levels, but people are really fearful that the detritus, once this everything of use is taken out of oil, that leaves something called petroleum coke that is literally in the areas where they're already using tar sands. There are mountains of this stuff that are already piling up, and people are really fearful of the health implications that this might have. And needless to say, no one believes that it's going to make you healthier.
Well, you think about the news article where that town is not able to have any kind of drinking water because that toxic waste essentially was dumped into their water supply. I mean, what you're talking about, this detritus could easily, once it accumulates, could be oops into a water supply or into the air in some toxic form that's going to have a health risk that is unforeseen, as you put it.
Exactly, but it's ineffective from a cost perspective. I mean, if all of those people get sick, do they really want to reduce the population so dramatically that they're willing to kill us all off? I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, if another country did to West Virginia what this company did by poisoning the water, we probably would have declared war last week.
Now, the other part of your article is, and it's really implicit in your title, is about priorities, really. Where do we spend our money? Where does the government get the most benefit, or at least the citizens of the country get the most benefit from government spending? And you're talking about infrastructural spending. Now, water lines, sewer lines, gas lines, things that flow in and out of cities to power them and to make sure that we have clean drinking water and so forth. These have aged. They've certainly been maintained, but at some point you have to replace some of those pipelines to make sure that they don't have any kind of leaks that could be toxic. And that's the kind of infrastructural spending that you're talking about, that you would like to see.
That's certainly a starting point. I mean, I live in New York City. There are water main breaks here constantly, and almost once a week you hear on the news that X Street or X Avenue is closed because of severe flooding due to a water main break. In New York City, anyway, they seem to patch them when something goes awry, but they don't actually do the maintenance. And I think that's true throughout the country. One of the surveys that was just done, a report that was done on budgeting and budget priorities, said that within the next 15 years, about 31,000 miles of water pipe is going to need to be replaced because it's over 50 years old. So many of our roads, our bridges, our tunnels are really decrepit. And it's not just the pipelines that bring water and gas, which is certainly a good place to start, but we also really need to think about infrastructure more broadly. And if we do that, we're talking about roads, highways, public transportation systems. And here again, in New York City, we have a pretty extensive subway system. That's not true in very many other parts of the country. So people have no choice but to drive their cars. If we really are serious about doing something about climate change and really taking seriously the need to create jobs, we need to create a fast rail system. We need to figure out other modes of transportation that can move a bunch of people at once rather than have each of us in our individual cars polluting the air.
You're talking about jobs, and jobs is something that politicians often talk about on the campaign trail. 2010 was supposed to be the year of jobs, 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 when the Republicans took hold of the House of Representatives and many legislatures around the country. That was the mantra. It kept going. Jobs. We're going to focus like a laser beam on getting this economy back on track and getting jobs for Americans. Now, the Republicans made the next 2 years about repealing the Affordable Care Act, decreasing the amount of money going to unemployment insurance and food stamps. So the issue of jobs, a politician will always say, oh, yes, I'm for jobs. But it seems to mean different things to different people, especially what your party affiliation is. If you're a Republican, it often means that it's lower paying jobs and tax breaks to those companies to help with their profit margin. If it's some Democrats, you hear a lot of times that we're going to need to bring good union jobs, or that, which is not so subtle code word for better paying jobs, so people can live more comfortable lives. Now, that's really what is at issue here. Where does the government spend the money to benefit the largest swath of Americans, and on jobs where they're good paying, that they're not going to be offshoreable or exportable to other countries so easily as what happens so quickly in many jobs here in the United States. That's something that can be at least thwarted, or at least maybe not thwarted, but decreased, if you will, if you locate and you spend the money here domestically. Projects that need to be done here and now, like you said, sewer lines, transportation, and so forth.
Right. I mean, obviously, that kind of infrastructure is important, but we also need to hire a lot more teachers. Teachers in almost every part of this country have been laid off. The class size is ridiculous, and the teachers that currently teach are forced to teach to the test. There's so much Common Core nonsense that forces teachers to basically teach to a script. the teachers are leaving. We need to really rethink education if we really want to think about priorities for national security, and we really want people to be able to think critically and actually be fully engaged in our world. Then we need to educate them so that they can do that. We need more teachers. We need less standardized testing, more preschools. When you talk about priorities, and we need to get rid of the cuts to food stamps and to social services. There are all kinds of that, as far as I'm concerned, is infrastructure too. And if we really want people to be able to function well, we need to educate them. We need to feed them. We need to provide places for them to live. And the average rent in Brooklyn right now is $3,000 a month. I don't know how people pay that $3,000 a month, other than to have a zillion people in a one-bedroom apartment crammed on top of each other like sardines. It's ridiculous. That's not a healthy way to live. We need to really rethink healthcare. We really need single payer insurance. All of these things are infrastructure in addition to things like bridges and tunnels and public roadways. So that infrastructure, as far as I can tell, it should be much more inclusive. And we really should be thinking in terms of all of the kinds of social supports and material supports that make it possible for people to live decent lives.
You in your bio, it was noted that you're a teacher. Are you teaching at what level?
I teach at a community college in Brooklyn.
And at the community college level, obviously the students that come in there, they're there by choice. It's not mandatory public education, but this community colleges are underwritten by the state of New York, and that's where you derive your money from. Out here in California, we've had severe cuts to the state colleges. I don't know, how are things in New York? Is it just as bad, or?
I can't really compare because I don't know enough about California, but I can tell you that our class size keeps increasing. At one point when I first started, the absolute cap in our classes was 27. I teach English, so our mandatory cap was 27. It's now up to 29, and occasionally it'll slip into 30. That's a big difference. If you have students who are writing one paper a week, having 35-page papers to read each week is a lot of stuff. But we all do it because we want to be there for our students. At the same time, the students are really struggling to pay their tuition. The financial aid caps keep getting smaller and smaller, so that you can get financial aid for a smaller and smaller amount of time, all told. And because our students are almost all immigrants, I'm going to make up a number, but I would guess 75% of our students were born in other countries, so English is not their first language. Almost all of them work full time, and most of them have children. So they're going part-time. And it takes a very long time. It's a 2-year college, but virtually nobody graduates in 2 years because they're taking one course here and 2 courses there and extending their stay for 5 or 6 years, and then just getting an associate's degree. So then to complete a bachelor's degree takes forever. If we really wanted the social supports to allow people to be in school and really kind of work their way through, we would increase financial aid so that the burden on them to work full time and raise their kids would be lessened. People get really discouraged. They get really tired. 5 years in, and they still don't have an associate's degree. They're exhausted.
Yeah, I know that Governor Jerry Brown here in California has he was able to get a tax increase through, and also he was able to, interestingly enough, take money through the cap and trade program and help balance the budget. But through that, he was able to increase money towards the UC, the CSU, and the community colleges, at this point 5%. But he is acutely aware of the fact that the amount of time it takes for a student to get through college they say it used to be a 4-year experience. It is 6 to 8 years at this point. And the amount of money that is outlaid by that student, do they recoup that once they start working? Are they able to pay down that debt? How much debt do they accumulate over 6 years? It can be a lot, because once you get to the 4-year colleges, the costs go up. And if you can't get your classes and you're just going to school part-time or having to take classes to maintain a full-time status, but they're not quite in your major, so it doesn't really count for much or really anything. I mean, that's almost time and money wasted.
That's right. And then all of a sudden you realize you basically have collected your financial aid for the allowable time period, and now you're not done yet. So you then need to go to a public, to a bank and take out a private loan. Because if you've got 80 credits, you don't want to walk away from it necessarily.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that you're able to come on the program to talk about our misplaced priorities, as you put it in your article, misplaced undemocratic budget priorities, the case for Keystone XL. Eleanor, thank you for being on the program. And that's Truthout Interviews for another week. Thanks for watching. I'm Ted Asregadoo.